Welcome to Taiwan Talks. I'm Albert Chiu. This 2024, we are delving into cross-strait dynamics. Chinese President Xi Jinping recently declared China will be reunified. What does this mean? Also, with Xi urging a diplomatic Iron Army, could this signal a change in China's approach to the West? Joining us today are Chen Ping-kuei, National Chengchi University Executive Master Program in Strategy and International Affairs CEO and Department of Diplomacy Associate Professor, and Ronan Fu, Academia Sinica, Institute of Political Science, Assistant Research Fellow. A very warm welcome to both on the show. Thank you.
Thank you.
On January 1st, Chinese President Xi and the US President Biden exchanged congratulatory messages to celebrate the 45th anniversary of the establishment of diplomatic relations between China and the US. So, Ping-kuei, would you first of all tell us that Xi's focus this year was on the unification of the motherland, echoing his New Year's message from 2022. The stance contrasts his 2023 New Year's message, where he referred to both sides of the strait of one family. So how can we interpret the shift in Xi Jinping's attitudes?
I would say it's a minor shift, but to emphasize that the unification is the ultimate goal, this is not something new. This is a consistent desire of the Beijing government. So I wouldn't say this is a significant change. However, we do see a more moderate tone this year. So as you can see, if you're saying that China will be unified in the future, you're not setting any timetable for that. So I think comparing to the past few years, I would assume that Xi Jinping would observe the situation in Taiwan Strait, and he would not try to bring more attention to cross-strait relations.
For the whole year in 2024, you think?
That's not, that depends. Mm-hmm. Depends on the political development in Taiwan, depends on party competition in Taiwan. So we all know that Beijing paid close attention to Taiwan's politics. Any change within the island will change Beijing's attitude.
And also a quick follow-up of this question is that do you think the economic recession in the domestic China will decrease the Xi Jinping's ambition to take Taiwan by force or even threaten Taiwan, or that's going to increase the ambition of him to do so?
My assessment is that in the recent public talks, Xi Jinping has been emphasizing endurance through hardship, which means the government foresees that economic downturn is coming, mm-hmm. and it wants all the Chinese people to embrace for this tsunami. And I think this is a signal that China is getting prepared to handle the internal struggles, mm-hmm. especially on the economic side. But on the other hand, we should not think that an economic crisis in mainland will make Beijing's attention on Taiwan lower. I don't think that will be the case. Mm. I think Beijing will still pay close attention to what Taiwan is doing if the leaders of Taiwan are taking any steps that Beijing do not desire.
Mm-hmm. Ronan, what about you? You agree with Ping-kuei's assessment that we still need to be very careful about the potential conflict between Taiwan and China, not simply because of the economic recession in the domestic Chinese society will decrease this possibility.
Yeah, absolutely. So basically, you can have two different arguments, and both arguments are compelling in its own turn. So basically, you can have the diversionary logic, meaning that economic recession could lead to higher probability of a Chinese invasion. So that's one point. But you could also argue that, for example, Xi Jinping has emphasized the importance of strategic consciousness, 战略定性, meaning that China has to see the role very clearly about what it has to do in the future. So it means that if internally China is not very stable, then it will try to stabilize the internal situation first. That basically will actually lower the possibility of a Chinese invasion. But like I said, you can have the argument in both ways. So Taiwan has to be optimistically cautious.
Mm-hmm. But also help us to understand Xi's focus this year was on the unification of the motherland. Is that anything different from the past statements by him?
Yeah, so I actually agree with Ping-kuei in terms of his assessment. I also think that it doesn't really signify a radical change in terms of how they perceive how to handle the cross-strait relations. But I would say that Xi Jinping appears tougher, at least rhetorically. And I think that's perhaps the main reason for that is because of the incoming election in Taiwan. And Xi Jinping is trying to influence the result of the election, albeit indirectly.
And sometimes when Xi Jinping addressed the national speech in the beginning of a year, he mentions Taiwan, sometimes not. Why is the difference? What kind of calculation are we be able to speculate about the difference?
We can only have speculation, but usually when a public speech refers to Taiwan specifically, it will be a stronger message to send to people in Taiwan and also politicians in Taiwan. We should also note that people in Taiwan, especially party leaders in Taiwan, will use Xi Jinping's statement as a political mobilization tool. So it is pretty important for Beijing to choose its wordings when it makes public announcements. So I do think when Xi Jinping mentioned Taiwan or mentioned Taiwan several times, it does have some meaning. Just as if when our president is addressing the public, when he or she mentions Taiwan, that matters too.
Right. Yeah. What about you, Ronan?
Yeah, I agree, and I want to emphasize that Xi Jinping is actually trying to speak to 3 different audiences. So the first, obviously, is the domestic audience. He needs to address the message to the Chinese citizens. Obviously, they are not going to forsake, their claim over Taiwan's sovereignty. That's number 1. Number 2, the message will also be sent to the Taiwanese constituents or Taiwanese citizens, if you will. And thirdly, and it oftentimes is got omitted, Xi Jinping is also trying to deliver a message to the U.S. So the U.S. decision makers are the third audience that Xi Jinping needs to adjust to. So 3 different audiences at the same time is Xi Jinping is trying what to achieve through his words.
Ping-kuei, you want to add up to this?
Yeah, so I totally agree with what Ronan says, and I want to add the 4th audience here. Xi Jinping is also trying to talk to his military generals. I think this is pretty important too. There has been reports about how hawkish generals are trying to push Xi Jinping to a more hawkish policy, and Xi has been very cool down about it. So I think it has some meaning to our military as well.
Well, this now take into account the factor of Taiwan. Xi actually comments on his wish for the 2024 is that the motherland must be unified and preventing Taiwan's separation from China, both in his New Year's message and at the CCP symposium on December 26th last year. But that is seen by some Taiwanese netizens as unintentionally aiding the ruling party in Taiwan, which is Democratic Progressive Party. How do you view the impact of these continuous statements on Taiwan's elections?
I think even when China is doing nothing, it is affecting Taiwan, right? The thing is, the people in Taiwan, politicians, netizens, they will use these moves to achieve their own political goals. Okay, so let's go back to the Xi Jinping's comment. So if you mentioned the symposium on the 28th, right? So that symposium is supposed to give it's a memorial ceremony for Mao Zedong. But throughout his speech, he was talking about Mao Zedong's contribution to the party and to the nation. And he calls on the people of China to learn from Mao Zedong and try to get through the hurdles. So you can see that the focus of that speech is focusing on the incoming economic crisis. We don't know what crisis it is yet, but I think Xi has been trying to warn Chinese people that economic crisis is coming, economic downturn is coming. So in that background, I don't think Taiwan issue will be the priority of Zhong Nanhai. And I think even though Beijing does have preference in Taiwan's election, I think over the years, Beijing have learned if it intervenes too much too obvious, it will backfire, and it will backfire pretty badly. So the best strategy for Beijing is to not doing too much about Taiwan's election, do not comment on Taiwan's election. We do see that the higher ranking officials in China has not comment on the election directly, right? I think this is purposefully done by the officials.
Ronan, did you see any salient CCP or even PLA's attempt to intervene in Taiwan's election this time?
Yeah, so I don't think that they actually did a lot of maneuvers in a very explicit way. But obviously, some implicit maneuvers must be going on. But I want to add to Ping-kuei's point that maybe they would try not to have their words having the backfire effect. Meaning, they don't want their words or their actions contribute to, for example, the victory of DPP. But oftentimes, your words and your actions can lead to unintended consequences. And this is precisely what's going on across the Taiwan Strait. So even if Xi Jinping is only appearing tougher, but these kind of tougher words could basically, lead to some misperceptions or, negative perception from the Taiwanese citizens, which basically will lead me to conclude that Xi Jinping's words or sometimes actions, even if he's not directly addressed toward the Taiwanese audience, these could still backfire from time to time.
Okay, now let's talk about economy. China's December 21st announcement to suspend ECFA preferential tariffs on products such as propylene is seen by some as a potential interference in Taiwan's election. KMT presidential candidate Hou You-yi, for example, vowed to quickly start ECFA negotiation for industry rights if he is elected. What impact do you think the ECFA issue will have on the Taiwan's elections and also in the long run, Taiwan's business, Ping-kuei?
I think it is very unfortunate because ECFA is indeed welcomed by the Taiwanese business, and it does bring substantive benefits to Taiwanese business for the past few years. So China's unilateral stop of the tariff is tariff concession, preferential tariffs is a bad thing. But we should note that this is probably the first step. There will be more change to the preferential tariffs in the coming year. We should note that ECFA is just a framework agreement, so it's supposed to be supported by a variety of negotiations coming after the signature. So we should expect the cross-strait government to talk about those trade negotiations, but unfortunately, the political hurdles stopped that negotiations.
So, Ronan, do you think it is wholly likely that any ruling party in Taiwan just want to negotiate with China with trade without touching even a little bit of the political dimension? Is it possible?
That's not possible. Yeah, it's like a mission impossible for any party coming to power. And I would like to add that actually, what's going on for the ECFA debate, basically, I think number one, it's going to have in terms of the short-term impact, it will be somewhat limited. And this is for two reasons. Number one, it just got announced, so you don't feel the immediate pain. That's one. Number two, a lot of Taiwanese enterprises have been de-risking for the past couple of years. So you can see that a lot of enterprises, they actually now are opening up new business in some Southeast Asian countries such as Vietnam or the Philippines. So short term, you don't really see the pain. So if we were to ask ourselves, is the ECFA issue going to affect the election result significantly? The answer is probably no. But what about the long term? The long term, there's a lot of uncertainty associated with what might be unfolding in the future. And I agree with Ping-kuei that it's going to be a very, very complex issue, surrounded by a lot of different calculations. For example, Beijing obviously they want to use trade as a bargaining chip, so that any ruling party in Taiwan would be willing to use trade basically to try to gain some economic benefits, but they have to pay something in return. And it could be some loss of Taiwan sovereignty. Yeah, so it's going to be a very complex issue. And my prediction is that Beijing will try to use its economic spacecraft somewhat subtly in the future. That's very possible.
Okay, let's come back to the leadership of the CCP. In light of cross-strait tensions, China's foreign policy strategy appears to be evolving. Xi Jinping, addressing overseas diplomats, emphasized strict adherence to rules and discipline, calling for a diplomatic iron army that is loyal, competitive, skilled, and disciplined. So the next question is, what is your interpretation of Xi's diplomatic iron army? Does this indicate a possible return by China to its former wolf warrior diplomacy approach?
I think he is referring to the recent development of the U.S.-China relations, where as relations get tense, there are more sanctions imposed on the Chinese corporations. And this creates a big challenge to Chinese diplomats in many countries, especially in developed countries, when European countries are corresponding to the U.S. sanction and cooperate with the U.S., that would limit the development and profitability of the Chinese enterprise. Especially those enterprises who are involved in the civil-military fusion, they are going to be impacted the most. So this will create a barrier for China's economic development. And as you can see, we have already seen that China's economy is somewhat in danger. And if this hits China, and maybe it will trigger a systemic crisis in China. So this is something the Chinese diplomat has been busy tackling for the last few years.
But in what way? Because the diplomats are basically, the function of them is to tackle foreign entities or nations instead of the public sentiments within, right?
No, it is also the public sentiment. It's also how to build China's image in foreign countries, right? So Xi Jinping's talk also mentioned that you should tell the good story about China, right? So this is the task is just altogether, right? They have to defend the national interest, and this requires disciplined diplomats. And not only disciplined, they have to be patriotic. So I think this is a very old-time communist loyalist talk. It is not like the wolf warrior talk. I think Xi Jinping himself learns that in the past few years, the wolf warrior backfired in many countries and caused a lot of problems for China's foreign relations.
Your observation?
Yeah, so I want to make 2 points. Number one, so basically the wolf warrior diplomacy is not really conducive to China projecting its soft power. So I agree with Ping-kuei that it's actually a bad strategy in terms of telling a good or better Chinese story. So I do not think that Xi Jinping is trying to bring all the wolf warrior diplomacy back. But like I said, everything could lead to unintended consequences, and that's what I observe. Basically, even with Xi Jinping apparently not trying to sell very aggressive assertive diplomacy or the way they engage with other officials in diplomatic setting, people still believe that it's wolf warrior diplomacy striking back again. So some people may even argue that it's like old wine in new bottle. But you can also see that Xi Jinping it could be a response from Xi Jinping to address, for example, the discipline issues among higher military and diplomatic officials. So it could be the case, it could be the reason why he emphasized the word iron. Iron means that, highly disciplined. Right. So it could be the case that he's trying to address the discipline issue. But what Xi Jinping cannot control is what the outside world might be interpreting his intentions or what he was doing. So right now, actually, the new turn actually fit into a new rounds of speculations and even some, negative sentiments toward China's diplomacy. So if they truly want to tell a good Chinese story, this is not helping.
Okay, now let's bring into the role of the Russia and the Ukrainian conflict still continuing. The New York Times reported that the Russian President Putin has shown willingness for a ceasefire on 2 occasions. In contrast, Nikkei Asia disclosed that during a March 2023 meeting in Moscow, Putin informed Xi Jinping of Russia's intention to continue fighting in Ukraine for a minimum of 5 years. Okay, so what is your assessment of the credibility of these reports?
I think we don't have the context of this report. The report comes from Nikkei. It was an unnamed source, so we cannot verify if this is really, this is true. Even if this is true, I think it is in the context of Xi and Putin was exchanging some views on whether on certain deals, for example, support of Russia on certain raw material or even military equipment. That might be the case. So Putin may suggest that we are still fighting and we expect to fight for a long time. So that might be the context, but we cannot know for sure.
Okay, Ronan, so should the commitments to a 5-year conflict between Ukraine and Russia prove true, which is very unfortunate, this diverts Xi Jinping's attention from his objective of unifying Taiwan, and what would be the significant repercussions for China-Russia relations as well as China's relations with Europe and America in general? Okay,
so before I answer your question, I want to add that I agree with Ping-kuei that we don't know for certain which source of information is correct. But that's just assuming that, Russia's going to stay on the battlefield for another 5 years. If that is true, then I agree that Russia will need more help from China. And China will have to divert some attention on that front. So in that sense, basically, if the attention is, for example, in the past, has been diverted on Taiwan entirely. Now you basically can see that China will have to figure something out with Russia if China really wants to help. So I do think that it's going to take some attention away from Xi Jinping in terms of dealing with cross-strait relations. But I do not think that that's going to lead to a radical change in terms of how they do business.
Final question is about the U.S. presidential election. That's going to be also an impact out there, focusing on specifically Donald Trump as the Republican frontrunner who is likely to come from Biden in the general election. So how does Trump's return impact U.S.-China relations? Will Trump's comeback prolong the Biden-Xi honeymoon phase?
First of all, I do not think Biden and Xi is in honeymoon right now. So there are still tensions. But the tongue is kind of softened compared with before. But now they are on the stage of crisis management between China and the U.S. And I think this will continue. Anyway, I think Trump will try to be different. Trump will be Trump, right? So Trump will emphasize that he can manage China. As to what aspect he can manage, I think he will focus on trade relations. I think he will focus on how to benefit American voters. This is how you can win primary elections. And as for U.S.-China relations in a global scale and great power competition, I don't think that will be Trump's main concern.
Ronan.
Yeah, so I do think that it's a question of reference point. If Trump is really going to be winning the election, then that will actually the possibility of Trump coming back will actually make Joe Biden look better in Beijing's eyes. Why? Because, like Ping-kuei said, Trump actually is a person of unpredictability. Beijing doesn't really know what Trump is going to do in the future. By contrast, Biden can be tough, but he's highly predictable, thereby manageable. Therefore, if the possibility of Trump coming back is looming large, then Beijing will actually try to, take advantage of the good opportunity that basically, like Ping-kuei said, they are in the crisis management mode. Some people will say it's a honeymoon, but basically they can talk. Nothing is for certain, but at least they can talk something over. So there might be some solutions, basically they could put aside some, very thorny issues, trying to focus on something that they can work on together. But if Trump is really coming back, that's really, really going to complicate the entire issue. But like I say, that will actually make Joe Biden more appealing in Beijing's eyes.
Okay, Ronan and Ping-kuei, thank you for the great insights and participation.
Thank you.
Thank you.
In this episode, we discussed the implication of Xi Jinping's recent declaration that China will be reunified at the start of 2024. While Xi appears to have improved relations with Biden, he's also focused on building a diplomatic Iron Army. Meanwhile, Taiwan is set to elect a new president, as is the U.S. this year. The U.S.-China-Taiwan relationship continues to be a focal point globally. Did you enjoy our show? Leave us a message and subscribe to Taiwan Talks. See you soon.